All right, all right. Well, welcome to Social Disruption, the show that shatters comfort zones, flips the script, and delivers unfiltered truth. I'm your host, Farah, and joining me is my co host.
I'm Cheyenne, and together we're here to disrupt the airways with real conversations, no filters, no apologies.
Trigger warning, this is a show where a spine isn't optional and the truth cuts deep. So let's get into it. So, welcome to our live show this evening. We have a wonderful guest on for you. The title is called Sex, Blood, and Psychopath Inside the Minds of the Most Twisted Criminals with Doug Fifer. Now, I have to give a strong warning about this. But first of all, what you're about to hear is raw, unfiltered, and deeply disturbing. Tonight, we are ripping the mask off of the sickest, most twisted crimes imaginable. Not to sensationalize, but to expose the harsh reality of the monsters walking among us. We're talking about serial killers, sexual deviants, necrophilias, stalkers, semen flingers, bestiality offenders, and predators hiding in plain sight. Now, some of these crimes are so depraved, they define comprehension. They defy comprehension, rather. They are not urban legends. These are real people, real cases, real victims. So the warning is a strong one because if you are easily disturbed, consider this your final warning because once you hear the details in this episode, you will never be able to unhear them. This episode is in no way, and I want to make this very clear, no way glorifying or trying to sensationalize the criminals of these crimes. This is for educational purposes. I do not want to see any comments after the fact of why we covered it, why we did what we did in this episode, because that's exactly why we have the strong warning for it. After it's given, it's on you as the viewer. If you went farther than the viewing, that's not on us. We are doing this because these people could be your next door neighbor. So tonight, we're not only going to uncover the crimes, but we're going to talk about red flags, what to watch for, and more. So let's welcome our guest on this evening, Doug Fifer. Doug, come on out.
Hi, glad to be here.
Wonderful. Thank you for so much for giving us your time this evening. We cannot wait to dive into this show. But first, we always start out with an icebreaker question. So I hope you're ready for this one. If you could have dinner with any three people, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
That's a good question. First off, probably a standard answer, but my dad passed away a while back. I'd have to bring dad back. One of
Oh,
the
my,
funniest,
my
uh,
condolences.
yeah, that's all right. One of the funniest guys you'd ever meet. Loved him. We always grew up as kids with a great sense of humor in our family. So I'd have to have another dinner with him. No question about it. I do love comedy, so I'm thinking I'm going to have dinner with Jerry Seinfeld. I'm a big Seinfeld fan. I think that everywhere in life, all their shows, somebody just like that. So I'd love to pick his brain. Uh, and then, further up on a sports fan, I'd play golf with, I guess it's dinner, but Tiger Woods. I'd have to chat with him. I'm not a great golfer, but he dominated the sport. I'd love to pick his brain a bit. So maybe those three.
Those are good picks. Those are good picks. And of course, introducing my co-host, Cheyenne.
Hi, Shannon.
She's up there in Connecticut facing some pretty strong wind, so she might be in and out. We'll see. She had lost power a while ago. It's back on, but let's get into this episode. Also, I do see in chat so far we have Larry joining us. Larry has been a huge fan of my show, my previous shows as well. So Larry, thank you so much for joining. Hope we see some others come into chat tonight, but let's get moving on. So you've worked cases most people couldn't stomach. You know what? Before we even start the questions, Doug, I messaged Doug because I read his book. Like I said, I'm 80 pages away from the end. But let me tell you, if you want a book that goes way beyond true crime, I mean, if you're like, I don't want to, I don't, I want to make sure I pick the words right, but I'm so of a simple person. I don't know if I can pick the right words. So I'm just going to say it how it is because we're just blunt here. So we're all fantasized by true crime for whatever reason. We just always want to know what's in these psychopaths' head. Doug, in his book, 50 Shades of True Crime, Sex, Drugs, and the Killer Kink, it goes to where he's having conversations with these people on why, who, taking us on journeys of how he got into the case, the interrogations, but the sick, twisted part, showing pictures. But he writes it in a dark humor, kind of satire-ish. What would you label it as, Doug?
I think you nailed that. I think cops, our jobs get stressful and you see a lot of things that the public doesn't, which is a good thing, but you got to have that dark humor. So throughout the book, to lighten it a bit, if you can say that, I incorporate that just to kind of help the reader. But cops use it themselves. That's the way of us releasing, some of that stress and
Right.
being able to do the job. So I think you're spot on.
I just think that it is, I mean, of course, true crime is such a touchy subject. And there's so many people that will go to shows like this and pick it apart. Like you're just always focusing on the criminals. And it's like, well, you can't really focus on the victims that much because you can say their life story, but once their life ended, there's no more to the pie except for trying to make sure this doesn't happen to the next person. So with your book, it almost gives a sense of real life, kind of still humanizing these people because they can still be your next door neighbor, and that they lived these lives of, pizza delivery drivers, or just a man walking a dog at a park, or going into a grocery store and picking fruit. You think he's going to eat it, but what he does after it's a little bit different. So it's kind of, we need to do this in a sense, as hard as it is to stomach. But I just had to give everybody 10 stars. One of, I will have to say, and this is something else because I had some strong books for number one and number two, but Doug's is the top two books I've ever read in my 47 years of reading life. So kudos to you, Doug. I love it. Great
That's
book.
very nice. I appreciate it. And thank you. And just for your listeners, there's tons of true crime out there. I've negotiated with serial killers. I've done all that. I think the first book I wanted for true crime is to kind of get out of the box a little bit and not be
Yes.
the same genre that all the other true crime books are. So this is really outside of the box. But the beautiful thing about this is it's all real true crime, but just a different twist, all sexual deviants. But I found in my career with family and friends at dinner parties, everybody would ask, what's the most sexually deviant crime you ever investigated? And once you started talking about it, they wanted to know more and more details. It wasn't that robbers and murderers weren't cool, or they would ask about them, but they really dug into the sexual deviant type crimes. And that's kind of what led to the book.
Like I said, great job on it. I will be shouting that book out all the time on this podcast. So definitely look for that. But let's get into the question. So again, you've worked cases most people couldn't stomach. What's the most disturbing thing you've ever witnessed?
I think
We don't
from
we don't go slow here. We get into
Yeah,
it.
no, I love it. Social disruption, that's what it's all about. From a
Exactly.
personal level, I'll tell you from a cop, and I think that most law enforcement would agree on this. Anything involving children's kind of just cements in your brain and lasts. So anything involving kids is brutal mentally for you. So that aside, I think that I worked crime scene for 4 years. We investigated homicides. We forensically mapped out the scenes. I think I remember every murder I ever worked on those scenes. Again, those are cemented. I could go through those one by one as if it happened yesterday. It's quite unique. It's not that it stresses me. It's just those are imprinted upon a law enforcement officer's brain. You never forget it. So those cases stand out. I remember every victim I ever worked, no matter how many they were. And it doesn't mean I have great memory. It just means that those cases are so unique and so traumatic that they're just embedded in your brain.
Exactly. And two, I want to thank you for your years of service in law enforcement, because that is a very, I don't think people understand the gravity of when somebody leaves a job every day and you may not come back. What we have seen in the past 4 years of cops getting a bad rap because of a few bad apples. I am one that is a big law enforcement advocate of really standing behind you guys and women, of course, and what you do. So the fact that you deal with children, that's, I mean, because any murder, of course, is bad, but when it's a little, and when it's elderly, when it's children and they can't defend themselves, much like an adult can at least fight maybe for a minute. I just give you so much credit for what you have done in the field. So thank you very much.
I
So
appreciate it. I'll tell you, Alaska is very supportive of law enforcement where I worked. So I had a wonderful career. And you mentioned one thing on, there's bad apples in every profession. And that's exactly right. 99% of your law enforcement throughout our nation are solid, hardworking individuals that do the best for their communities. In any profession, whether it's doctors, lawyers, corporate executives, they all have bad apples. That's just human nature. But the vast majority
exactly.
of law enforcement does a great job.
And one day I will move to Alaska. I'm planning on it. So,
All right,
but
come up and see us. It's beautiful.
wonderful. So the questions that I have for you this evening, I also listened to one or two podcasts that you were on, the Paranormal 60, and also the one with Eileen Santos. So I'm trying to I was going through questions. I wanted to hit you with some hopefully different ones, but the main thing I want to really pick apart, what I want to get out of this entire episode is really the red flags, the warnings, breaking a case down piece by piece. So are killers born or are they made? What do we know about these particular ones, the sexual deviant ones? What are they did they kill animals? Did they not? But was there something else that might have been a red flag? Did you get a chance to talk to any of their family, or did they even let you know their history whenever you would talk with them, or anyone else you knew that did?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I wish I had the perfect answer for you. And if I did, then law enforcement and our community would stop all crimes. So I don't have the perfect answer. What I will tell you is it's all over the map. In my book on sexual deviancy, obviously sex is biological. It's in our bodies, but it's power. It's about power. So some of these killers, whether it's sexual deviancy or even serial killers with homicide, it's about that power. So human nature, you got to throw that in. But I tell people these might be your coworkers, your best friend, your next door neighbor, working jobs that, in our society that are very professional. You just never know. So in my career, and I do ask every criminal I've ever arrested, I try and get into that psyche. I think it's important as law enforcement for me to learn, helps me to be a better investigator and solve crimes moving forward. But it was really all over the map. Some were abused when they were younger. Some really had great childhoods and then just turned to crime. Some got into drugs, and then mentally they were hardwired differently because of the drug use, and then they started committing crimes. So it's all over. I don't have an easy answer other than it's everyone, and you never know who it's going to be.
So going off that a little bit, the one thing that I had written down listening to one of your podcasts that came into my mind was, did these people have families? And if so, like, were there any red flags as far as, like, did any of these guys say Israel, I think that's how you say it, but
Israel
like,
Keys.
yes, do they have girlfriends? I guess the reason why I ask that is because anytime that you listen to a true crime case, you find out, even take like the BTK killer. He was out there for 25, 30 years, but had a wife, two children, but yet he killed a child and a woman, like his wife, I mean, of a female. Why is that so hard for me to understand, that they don't kill their family, but they go out there and do it to everyone else? But don't they ever put themselves in that mind space of, now wonder if, like, BTK had two daughters, wonder if one of my daughters, wonder if someone did that to them, so if these people had relationships or close friendships, how do they do that? How do they go on with all of that and live a life?
Yeah. The true answer is most serial killers are sociopaths. So you and I are talking with a normal human brain where we relate, we have empathy, we relate pain, suffering. They don't. They separate that in their brain. So it's hard to think in context of a serial killer. When I interview a serial killer, he can literally tell me that he bashed his skull in with a rock, sexually assaulted the victim, and then he went to McDonald's, went through the drive-through, got a hamburger and ate it. Just matter of factly, like we're talking today. So you have to put your mind in the mind of a serial killer. It's entirely different. They don't think normal. They're hardwired differently. So they act upon these power fetishes to kill people. And it's no different than you doing something you like and then going off and doing something else. They don't connect like we do. So there's no empathy there. So it's even hard for us to even start to comprehend how they act. And we never will because we think normally.
Okay. Cheyenne, go ahead with 5 and 6. I just texted you, but you probably weren't looking.
No, I was actually I was listening to this because my background revolves around psychology and psychotherapy. So I completely understand what you're saying, how they departmentalize different aspects. So, like you said, we could go kill somebody and then go to McDonald's, just like Fair and I could go to the mall shopping and then go get our nails done, right? So, very like
Totally.
separating things out. Yeah. And then carry on like a normal life. So, have you ever met a killer that is seemingly completely normal? Do you think that they're able to hide that darkness?
Yeah, the misconception we have on serial killers, and I've dealt with many of them, is that they're unintelligent, that they don't fit in with society. Entirely untrue. The serial killers I have interacted with are highly intelligent. Uh, I don't want to say genius level, but they're incredibly smart. So they've had families, they've had girlfriends, they've had children, they've worked jobs full time, they've run businesses. Israel Keys, who you mentioned, ran a full-time construction business, very successful, could build you a house up and down, sideways, do whatever you want. Had a girlfriend, a daughter. He would murder his victims, put them in his shed 9 feet away from their house with his girlfriend and daughter, and then commit serious acts upon those victims. Totally separated. His girlfriend knew nothing about it, and he operated in life as we normally would. So from 9 to 5, he's Joe Worker. At nighttime, he becomes a serial killer and stalks victims. So uh, my experience is they're very organized. They're smart. What I find how we catch them is ultimately that brain takes over where they start to make mistakes, meaning that they've killed individuals, they've got away with it, but that need for more and more power, that, feeding that power within them overcomes them and they start to make mistakes. When you interview him, Israel Keys is a prime example. He would fly out of Alaska, commit homicides, fly back to Alaska. They were unsolved. He knew better than to commit homicide in Alaska because he'd be caught. But he told us his brain overpowered him. He couldn't stop it. And ultimately, he committed a homicide in Alaska, which we ended up arresting him and then solving a bunch of murders. So typically they last a long time, and that's the reason. But in the United States, at any moment, there's 40 to 50 serial killers walking our nation at any given time that we don't know about.
That
Wow.
terrifies me.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, maybe getting a little bit too grandiose and feeling a little bit comfortable and thinking, oh, I've gotten away with it this many times. And when you bring them in, uh, their confessions are, like you're saying, very matter of fact. But what was the most terrifying confession that you've ever had from a criminal?
I think there was a serial killer called Joshua Wade. He was convicted of 2, admitted to 5 in a plea deal, probably good for 15. But in some of my conversations with him, he would literally walk through A to Z on the homicide. That's the one I referenced earlier with, smashing a skull in with a rock, a female victim, sexually assaulting them, and then going, disposing of the body, either burning some of his victims to get rid of the evidence, things like that. Those were really hard to walk through because he has no regard for human life whatsoever. And I couldn't, thinking as an investigator, the pain and agony that that victim went through is always in the back of your mind. It's not in his mind at all. He could care less what happened to the victim, but you have to sit there and actively interrogate, negotiate, and talk friendly with somebody that commits those heinous crimes. Very difficult for me. You think about it afterwards, but in the moment, to protect society and to get a conviction on that individual, you have to stay in the moment and focus and not give in to that emotion where you want to be angry. As difficult as it is, those make the best investigators because you build rapport and you get those admissions and ultimately the convictions.
Now, do sexual sadists feel remorse or do they just pretend to? I know that you said that they don't have that empathetic part, but do you have someone that comes to your mind that is such a smart ass, you almost, they're almost pretending or being sarcastic about it. Does anyone ever, or was there someone that did say truly sorry after he got caught?
They all say sorry after they get caught. I'll be honest with you. They all find Jesus after they've been caught. I mean, it's the whole gamut and array of it. I believe very little of it. I'm not saying that, rehabilitation, I'm 100% for. If you're a thief, if you're a burglar and we catch you, I think you should get some time and then rehabilitate and be let out in society. We get to serial killers and murderers and things like that. I think there's no choice but to incarcerate them, put them in prison. Many of them that I investigate or interrogate go to religion, go to the Bible. They found, the right way. I think most of it is a front, to be honest with you. We never know, but I think most of it's a front. I don't buy into it because these acts were so heinous throughout their career and multiple that I find it hard to believe. So I've never really seen it on that remorse other than smaller level crimes. I think people certainly have remorse and they fix themselves and they go on to be productive. And I'm all for that. But high level crimes, extremely rare.
To go off of that, do you think, I don't like the fact of criminals staying in prison for so long and, that commit the most heinous of acts. Do you think, like, if they would put in more rehabilitation programs in prison, would it even work? Like, what do you think? If you were in charge, Doug, of making 2 or 3 classes on trying to rehabilitate a sexual deviant, what would come to mind that that may work or that you could try?
Yeah, I don't want to be a Debbie Downer here. It's virtually impossible in my
Thank
experience,
you.
25 years. And what I'll tell you is let's take
Yep.
pedophilia, for example. I've arrested many pedophiles in my career, and that burns me to the core. I have children, we all do. They're the least protected victims. I mean, it's hard, once you victimize them, it's hard for them to ever recover. So I've interviewed pedophiles, and I always ask them that question. How could you be rehabilitated? Is there a way? How is your mind wired? And I had one that was very matter of fact with me. He said, "What is your sexual preference?" And, I'm married. So I said, my wife, a woman. And he said, "Okay, how about if I told you tomorrow that your sexual preference was a child? Could you do it?" And I said, Absolutely not, never." And he said, "I'm the same way. You can tell me whatever you want, that I should like women, men, adults. I will never change how I'm wired. I will always prey upon children." It was one of the
Ooh.
most honest and eye-opening confessions I ever heard. But the light bulb kind of clicked with me. He was honest. And I realized from that point forward that there's really no rehabilitation for somebody like that. In an extreme case, maybe, but what I found on pedophiles is they reoffend in the high 90s rate. And the only reason it's not 100% likely is because we don't solve 100% of it. So I don't think there is. But again, once we get into crimes like, if you robbed a bank, absolutely. There's rehabilitations. There's, if you're a drug addict, maybe there's, get off the dope, get a
Right.
job, work through that. I absolutely agree with that. Some of these higher level ones, serial killers are about power. The ultimate power, one told me, is taking a life. It's not about sex. It's not about anything else. When he takes a life, it's the most euphoria he's ever felt in his life. He can't stop it. He likens it to people who are drug addicts. They can't stop. He gets the same euphoria by killing people, so he won't stop. So those type of crimes, there's really no rehabilitation.
And you just saying that really puts a lot into perspective. And I think that's a huge misconception, not giving credit to the criminals whatsoever. But for you and I, Cheyenne, that are normal, we go and we were taught the way to be normal. When I am a recovering drug addict. So I know that when you start doing something, you have a way of doing it, it's wrong, but if you're normal, you can get out of that. Whereas you can see how sick in the mind these people they can't get out of it because it's almost like a disease. It's a disease where like Cheyenne said, we can go to the store. We know what to do after the store, this and that. We're going to go home and have sex with our husbands. You're going to have sex with your wife. Everybody's going to have sex with who their partner is. It wouldn't cross our mind to do something abnormal, sick, deviant. These people, it's almost like you kind of feel for them in a way because of the fact that it's wrong and they shouldn't be doing it. That's how we look at it. But yet, they can't help it because the way they are wired, it's normal to them. So it's normal for me to go in and say, hey, hubby, I'm ready. Let's have sex. That's normal. For him, it's like for a, a deviant killer, it's like, ooh, gross. I want this gets me off more. So it's just, it puts that so much into perspective as awful as it is. But they do have something that it can't be rehabilitated, because how would you rehabilitate Cheyenne? Like, okay, take Cheyenne, for instance. How would you get her to start sleeping with a woman? You can't. You know what I mean? You would have to beat her to death and like pretty much, put a gun to her head to do it, because it's not in her DNA to do that. So it is something that's wired within their brain, in their DNA cells. It just runs through their blood, which that's even scarier, because then how do you control someone like that on the street? So I guess that goes to my next question. What patterns do you see in serial predators? What fuels their obsessions?
Yeah, so one point that you just made when you mentioned disease, I liken the brain in law enforcement to any of your other body parts. So let's say your heart, your lungs, your liver, where they can become diseased. Your brain is certainly an organ that can become diseased or hardwired differently, like you said, in your DNA. So absolutely, extremely difficult to rehabilitate somebody like that that's affected that way. There's no question. What I see with serial killers, with their histories when we research them, because it's important that we try and learn as much as we can to stop these individuals, is like I said earlier, it's hard to pinpoint. Some do have childhood trauma that contributes, some don't. But what I do see with all criminals, serial killers included, is a pattern that they start lighter style crimes and ultimately progress to more egregious offenses. So they might start with shoplifting, as minuscule as that is, stealing something. Stealing may become burglaries, where you break into a home, steal electronics or jewelry. The burglaries can become peeping toms, where they stare into windows and watch individuals. Those can become sexual assaults, where they actually offend against a victim. And then once that offensive is not enough, then they move on to murder. And then once they get that high on some of these serial killers, again, it comes down to power. It's the ultimate high for them. So they can't resist that power. It's something they truly love. So that's what drives them to keep getting that power over and over and over again to satisfy them. Just like we would like something in our life, like going to Maui on vacation, being on the beach, we love it. That's their power. It's different. They're hardwired different than we are. So it's going to be completely different on what they look for, but that drives them. And they're always just kind of like people who are addicted to drugs. They always want that high again. They're always searching it. So they're killing more and more, and they don't stop until they're caught by law enforcement.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I think talking about the whole hardwiring and how you can't, it's unfixable. You can't fix that. You can suppress it with medication or with chemical castration, but you can't fix that hardwiring. So let's roll into some crime scene talk for a little bit here, Doug. Can you take us inside of a crime scene? What is the first thing that kind of hits you when you walk in?
Well, the crime scenes aren't as fun as everybody looks at. When you watch CSI, which is a series, and those agents go out there and they hammer out a crime scene, and they find a hair on the chair within 4 seconds, and then they get it, they do DNA, they analyze it, and then we got the suspect arrested 5 minutes later. The show's cool and all that. That's not anywhere close to reality. So when I get a call, it's typically 2 o'clock in the morning, after you've already worked an entire day, and it's to respond to a homicide scene. There's a team of us, about 5 to 7 investigators, that go out there, and we forensically map that. So let's say we had an individual that was murdered in an apartment. From that door, the doorway into the apartment, we would photograph, fingerprint, super glue to get additional fingerprints, collect any evidence, If the body was in the back of the apartment, we would slowly, meticulously move, again, vacuuming, collecting every fiber of evidence all the way till we got to the body. Now we would then look at the body. We would call the medical examiner out, and then we'd photograph it. That body would be taken for an autopsy. What's unique in Alaska, as an investigator, I would attend all those autopsies. And the reason being is because of the chain of custody. So the medical examiner would, literally find the evidence in the body, hand it over to me. I would photograph, video the body as this process went on. But I'm the chain of custody. So I handled all the evidence. So we worked hand in hand with the doctors. I would then put that into evidence. And then we would start the investigation to find the killer in the case. That process to map that scene, even in an apartment, would be 18 to 24 hours. Then I would immediately go attend the autopsy, which would be another 3 or 4 hours to document the evidence. This is just beginning the investigation. So when you see it on TV and CSI and all that, it looks glamorous, but it's really hard work. You're absolutely exhausted. But what drives you is the ultimate goal of solving these to protect society, because killers don't stop with one. When I mentioned there's 40 to 50 serial killers in our nation right now, they will not be stopped until law enforcement stops them or they die of some other reason. Uh, Nothing stops them but us. So that kind of drives you as an investigator to get that, but it's a really hard job, but super important. So that's really what we do on a daily basis.
And so you talk about sweeping the crime scene. It's very meticulous. So obviously not a 40-minute episode with 20 minutes of commercial breaks, right?
Yep.
Uh, and then you do the stuff included with going to the morgue for the autopsy. So what is the most gruesome detail that you've ever had to document?
Well, autopsies are not comfortable. I mean, they'll literally, in Alaska, we fish a lot, so you fillet fish to eat them. They'll literally fillet a body, meaning take all the skin off to show if it's stab wounds, if it's gunshots, whatever it is, fingernails for evidence from scrapings, all that. They'll take the body apart, which is hard to see for somebody that's not a medical doctor, certainly not an investigator, but not a medical doctor. It may be okay for the medical examiner, but for me, the first time it was a little bit odd. It's not that you get used to it, but it's important. But that body's taken completely apart. The evidence is taken out, and then the body's put back together remarkably when you don't think it would be, all sewn up like they were never taken apart. So that was always weird for me. I mean, it was all, you get a little Silence of the Lamb type thinking. It just
Right.
was weird. And I never got used to that. I mean, I could do it, but in my job, I was like, this is, it even creeped me out as an investigator, but you had to do it because we had to show the evidence that came from the victim to ultimately get a conviction. It's highly important. But that always stuck with me with being a little bit, I never looked forward to that. I didn't want to go to it. I knew I had to. It was always a little bit painful for me professionally to do those, but you had to work your way through to get that solved.
So, what's something about crime scenes that the public never gets right? What's like a misconception?
Yeah, absolutely. So DNA is the biggest thing we've ever heard, and DNA solves everything. And if your DNA is there, then you're guilty. What I would caution the public on is just because your DNA is at a crime scene isn't enough for a jury to convict. There's case studies throughout my career where DNA has been planted at crime scenes, where multiple DNA has been found at crime scenes, and people have been convicted wrongly. So DNA is a part of the evidence, but it's not 100% slam dunk. The public and juries just believe that if your DNA is at the crime scene, it's game over for you. And while that might be true, and I love DNA because it solves a lot of crime, it's not 100%. It's a misconception. We might find 10 or 15 traces of DNA at a crime scene, and we have to go through those 15 suspects to whittle it down to one, maybe a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a partner, whatever it is, to try and hone in on that homicide suspect. But there's probably 15 different DNAs that we go through before we get to that one. The public thinks you just go and find the DNA, convict the individual, and you're out. Never. I wish it happened that way, but it doesn't.
So, what would be the next runner up to that then, Doug? Like after, like if say you don't get DNA. So, what's usually the next that can slam dunk well, not slam dunk a case, but be the biggest thing, kind of up there with DNA if DNA is not found, but convict somebody?
Absolutely. It's fingerprints. Yeah.
Fingerprints.
And
Okay.
with fingerprints, I mean fingerprints, palm prints, shoe impressions, all that. But it would be that hands down.
So, what do you think the biggest mistake cops make when interrogating a killer?
Building rapport. There's
Oh,
no question about it.
I'll
So
agree on that one.
yeah, there's no question. And what I do as an investigator is, let's say, Farah, God forbid, you committed a homicide. I'm gonna come into that room with you. We're not even going to talk about the homicide for 45 minutes. I'm going to find out about Farah, where you're from, who your family are, who your mom is, who your dad is, what you like to do, not even touching any criminal aspect whatsoever. You and I are just going to chat back and forth very slowly. Going to get you whatever coffee, drink, food you want. I'm going to do the best job I can for us to kind of get used to each other a little bit before I start into the crime interrogation. The biggest mistake I see with investigators is they go hardcore too fast and it shuts down that communication. I'm not saying my tactic always works, but it's proven that it works more than it doesn't. And I had the benefit in my career of being a hostage negotiator. So I train and I did this daily, which leads to being a very good interrogator by building that rapport, being very friendly back and forth, and then ultimately getting the confessions that I needed to convict people.
So now have you how do you get a monster to talk besides that? And take us through an interrogation that you did with someone. I'm very curious to know what the report is back and forth.
Joshua Wade, for an example, is a serial killer that I was the hostage negotiator. He had killed multiple victims, and then he was on the run in Alaska. So we had a statewide manhunt for this individual. He
Mm-hmm.
would obviously kill again. Uh, he was picked up by police officers in Anchorage, where he fled and broke into an apartment, taking two hostages. That's when I got the call to come out and hostage negotiate with the serial killer one-on-one. So I responded to the scene, and over the course of many hours, I established a rapport with this serial killer to get him out to not harm any additional victims. And what's important here is once you've killed multiple people, it's not a far stretch for you to kill a couple more, right?
Right.
So he's at a prime killing point in his life. He would kill others. He had a handgun, very easy to kill somebody. So what I do is in this instance is serial killers can be very egotistical. They're very proud of their work. They think they're highly intelligent. So I use that against them. If I find that you have a strong ego, I'll use that against you. I'll play heavily upon your ego, how smart you are, how well you committed some of these crimes, how well you evaded law enforcement for multiple days in a small town, how smart you must be. And it's just human nature for them to come back and say, I am smart. I am grandiose. I am the best serial killer to ever live on this planet. I must tell my story because if I don't, the rest of the world will never know how great I am. So I use that against them, and they just start slowly but surely giving you that information. And I just play it up on how great they are. It seems odd. If you listen to taped interrogations, you're going to think that I'm a little bit odd as a cop. It's by design. I'm not friends with
Right.
this individual. I loathe Joshua Wade. I wish all serial killers would die a horrific death from what they did to their victims. But in the moment, I'm their best friends. It's no different than him and I being at a baseball game, a football game, sharing a beer. We're as friendly as can be, but that's by design.
But see, you have to do what you have to do. And it just the way that you just said that reminds me of the whole thing that we're dealing right now with like Trump and Ukraine and Russia. And everybody's like, Trump, you're like, Putin's best friend. And it's like he said, it's not like I'm going to sit here and bash him to the media and then call him up and be like, come to the table and let's talk peace. You have to do what you have to do to save face to get the end result that you want, which is locking these people up. And real quick, Joshua, he's dead now, isn't he? He died in prison.
Yeah, he died in prison. I document this in my book that anything you can get on the outside, in the outside world, you can get in the prison system, including all the drugs. So Joshua Wade was released to the general population where it's a new synthetic drug similar to fentanyl. It's actually 3 times more potent than fentanyl. And so he overdosed, not on purpose, by accident. He was a unique serial killer. Interesting thing about Joshua Wade is I make contact with him post incarceration, which is very odd, meaning I have conversations with him on his killings that he'd done that were never convicted. Unfortunately, or fortunately, he died in prison. And so those conversations, I'll have to see if I can solve some of those additional homicides.
Right.
Those are to be determined, but we had quite a unique relationship. One is cop and serial killer, and then post is retired cop and then serial killer in prison. So I've had multiple discussions with him, but he's probably good for 15 murders.
Oh, sure, no doubt.
Wow. Wow. So, Doug, have you ever had a suspect where you're like, wow, man, this guy's just way too dangerous to be left alone with?
Are you talking about like in an interrogation room or where? Not really. I mean, we always have the upper hand. If you're in an interrogation room, you're certainly searched multiple times. You're not going to have any weapons. They're video recorded, audio recorded. So where if I'm interrogating a suspect one-on-one or two-on-one, you're going to have a video conference room with multiple officers. So if anything happens, you rush right to the scene. Where mistakes happen or where these individuals aren't searched properly and they may have a weapon, and then that really jeopardizes law enforcement lives. But I'm pretty keen on making sure that individual has nothing on them, whether I got to search him 5 or 6 times. And I don't take for granted if another officer searches a suspect, when I come in contact with them, I do another search of them just to make sure to
Right.
calm my fears. And then we get into that rapport. But again, we're not going to talk about anything related to the crime for a while. We're just going to bullshit and talk about everyday life. I'm going to put him or her at ease, and then we're going to get into the real meat of the crimes.
Mm.
Yeah, and I like that you talk about the importance of building that rapport, but at the same time, you're sitting there across the table from somebody that's absolutely pure evil. So how do you decompartmentalize that in your own emotional regulation while you're in the interrogation room?
Yeah, I always want the win. So I keep the win in mind, meaning that that report, it's repulsive to me in my heart. There's no doubt about it. I actually cringe at some of the conversations when you're talking about just the pure victimization and what you did to that individual. In your mind as a cop, you wish that they would just die because you're so appalled at what they said. But you know that you got to get the win, and the win is solving this crime, getting closure for the families. As bad as the closure is, it's never good closure. Closure is better for families than nothing, meaning that there's a body out there that you can't find. They never know what happened to their loved ones. That that victimizes their families for their lives. Absolutely unacceptable. So if I can solve a homicide that's unsolved and get closure for that family, even as horrific as it is, I got to suck it up. I got to suck up my own emotion and focus on that, the prize there. And the prize is that confession, multiple confessions on what they did, where those bodies might be, and ultimately solve those. So it is painful. I'm not going to, I can't sugarcoat it. And afterwards, you got to decompress a little bit. And it's like, wow. I like it. I like to work out. I like sports. There's nothing more exhausting for me than to sit in an interrogation for 4 hours and come out of there. I can sleep for a day and a half. It's the most exhausting thing I've ever gone through because mentally it's so tasked and you're playing that chess match constantly back and forth to ultimately get to that resolution.
So now we're going to get into some cases. Now, being that, like I said, I read 3/4 of your book, I don't want to give too much away because I want people to go out and get your book. But I want to go through some of these cases. And this is where I'm going to put up that strong warning, okay? Just because of some of the details of these cases. So the first one I want to start with, I still can't believe this one. So the pizza guy case. Um, Tell me a little bit. I mean, because like I said, I don't want to give details, me do it. I want to hear it from you. But the case stands out as one of the most bizarre crimes. And go through how you took us in the book on how that came about and just be as detailed as possible what he did. And good Lord, just if you hopefully you guys can stomach this. This is just off the charts. It's just one of the off the charts one. But Doug, please go into that case.
Yeah, Farrah, you're right. This is one that still fascinates me to this day. And I'll tell your listeners, that case happened a long time ago. I have still not ordered takeout pizza since that day. So I think it affects me that way too. In the book, I detail it's one of the top 3 pizza delivery companies in the nation. So I'll let viewers kind of think through that. But this was a unique case in Anchorage, Alaska. I had got a call with another officer for a pizza delivery truck that was parked in the end of a neighborhood in a cul-de-sac, just sitting there. So neighbors were concerned because this individual had been there for so long. And in communities, we get these calls all the time. Typically, it's somebody just resting, texting, taking a nap. They got to get out to pee, something like that. It's 95% of the time, it's no big deal. So we went to the call. It's winter in Alaska, which is heavy snow, gets dark quickly, it's cold. Went to the call. The pizza delivery truck was still there. Most of the times they're gone by the time we get there and we just clear the call. But it was still there. So we just, we had to make contact, see what he was doing. So we walked up on both sides of the pizza delivery truck. And inside it, it was just a single seat truck, very small truck, was the driver. And then on the right side of the vehicle were the pizza boxes that you would normally deliver hot pizzas in. Uh, and so we kind of looked in and the windows were fogged up, meaning he'd been there, and a little bit odd. But as I clearly looked in, I was wondering what this guy was doing. He didn't know we were there because we had walked up, very quietly. We like to keep the element of surprise as cops. Uh, what I saw him is I saw him, was actually actively trying to masturbate in the truck, which as a cop isn't the biggest deal in the world. We see it all. So at this point, come on, go somewhere else if you're going to do that, but not here. So my partner, I was like, check this out. So he looked in, he saw it, and we kind of looked back and forth. And the guy was really going, trying to go to town, and he was just, so finally I had enough of it. We're not going to watch this forever. So I knocked on the window and I said, what the fuck are you doing? In cop language, because this guy's masturbating in the middle of nowhere. He flipped out. He immediately jumped out of the car with his pants down, which, as a cop, I don't like people naked, jumping on me. So I told him, hey, pull your pants up, which he did, but he was profusely sweating. I did a quick pat down to make sure he didn't have any weapons. And I said, what are you doing? So his first comments to me was, I did something bad. I did something bad. Well, bad in police work could be murder, or it could be something, like a shoplift. I don't know what that is to him. I know murder is bad to me. So of course I asked him, well, what'd you do? He told me he couldn't tell me. And he was profusely sweating. It's cold out, it's wintertime. So there's no need to be sweating, which shows me that you're extremely nervous and maybe you did something really serious. So ultimately, I told him, you're either going to tell me what you did, or I'm going to call your pizza company. I'm going to find out who you delivered to. Because at this point, I think maybe there's a victim where he burglarized, killed somebody, sexually assaulted somebody. Something weird's going on here. I don't know what it is. He says, I'm going to get fired if you do that. As a cop, I don't really give a shit if you're going to get fired. If you did something wrong, it's not on me, that's on you. So I told him, I'm going to make the call and I'm going to go every house you delivered to. You're going to stay right here. We're going to detain you. We're going to figure this out. So he kept saying, I did something bad. I did something bad. I said, what was it? Ultimately, he told me that he masturbated on a pizza. Now, at first, I thought Candid Camera was going to jump out of the woods and film. I was like, I couldn't have heard that right. And at this point, I didn't even know what masturbated on a pizza meant. I know what it kind of meant. I didn't know, does that mean he rolled his penis around the pizza? Did he ejaculate on it? I don't know what the hell he did.
Right.
But now I'm going to find out for damn sure. Ultimately, he said that there was a female that he had delivered to multiple times in a very exclusive, nice neighborhood in Alaska. He had a fondness for her. He liked her. So what he would do, not just on this occasion, but on all occasions, he would take her pizza when she ordered it, actively masturbate onto the pizza, eject his semen, and then he would even, not to be caught, because he thinks he's smart, he would rub it around the pizza so you couldn't actually see it. Then she would eat the pizza. He would park down the street. He would try and masturbate again, thinking of her eating the pizza. Again, remember back to our PowerPoint. This is all about power. It's not about sex. But he couldn't actively masturbate because he'd just done it minutes ago. That's why when I came upon him, it was kind of like a wet noodle he's trying to masturbate with. He couldn't do it. I was blown away. I didn't even know what to do, to be honest with you. I'd never really had this situation. So I called our on-duty prosecutor and I said, here's what we got. And we have law books that we go through. We can charge you with any crime. There's no crime for masturbating on a pizza. It's not in the books. So I called our prosecutor and he said, what did you say? And so I explained it to him again. He was literally shocked. He said, I don't even know if we have a crime. I'm going to have to call you back. So now the cop's perplexed, the prosecutor's perplexed, but he says this thing. He says, where's the pizza? I said, I don't know where the hell the pizza is. It's at the house. He's like, go get the uneaten pizza. Go get it for evidence. So I said, no problem. So I hang up with him, mad dash to the house, ring the doorbell. Of course, the female answers the door. I have to explain to her as a cop what just happened. You can imagine being in her shoes. Unfortunately, the pizza had been entirely consumed. There was no evidence left. Not much I can do there. I mean, it's gone. So I go back, I call the prosecutor. He says, what happened with the pizza? I was like, it's all eaten, it's gone. So he says, I don't know, we don't have a crime. Write this up in a report and let him go. I was like, come on, there's got to be some way. We can't do this. He said, nope, let him go. So he was released. I wrote up the report to send it in. I knew that this would make national news at the time. It would have to, because this is a giant pizza company. The female was obviously entirely upset, going to sue, going to do all these type of things. So even at our own police department, we had a betting pool on what the settlement would be. Ultimately, when this was done, we guessed ourselves how big this settlement would be from this pizza company. Little did I know the power of big business. They came in, went to the victim's house. There was a 7-figure settlement done, and the charges completely went away. And what that means is once you enter into a civil agreement, the police department, other than serious crimes like homicide, things like that, the police department has no part. You must have a charging victim. So she took that settlement, which was, over $1 million. And for that case, he was obviously fired from his job at this company. Whatever happened to him, I don't know. But that's one individual that would certainly offend again in some way, some fashion, some form. That's getting into extreme fetishes where he's going to victimize others at some other point. Unique case in my career. I still don't eat takeout pizza to this day because of that.
I don't know if we order pizza a lot, I'll have to say. So it definitely turned my stomach a little bit. But
Yep.
with someone like that, he had done this for a while. How do these people go undetected for so long, do you think? Just because they don't go out and do a higher crime like murder, and then you can start piecing, or then you find out in interrogation that they start, just confessing everything.
Yeah, I wish I had a better answer than the one I'm going to give for your listeners, but this will remind them to lock their doors at night. The Anchorage Police Department's about 400 to 420 officers, depending on when we're fully functional and filled and recruiting. You could take all 420 and put them specifically and only on sexually deviant crimes, and it wouldn't be enough. So the short answer is it's impossible for law enforcement with our current numbers to even investigate, to track individuals like this, to solve those crimes, especially with other crimes such as theft, burglary, homicide, serial killers. We have to investigate them all. So the short answer is you can't fully stop it. It's impossible. There's too many perpetrators out there with these sexual deviancies that you can only hope to be lucky and catch them when they mess up. I thought it'd be great for the Anchorage Police Department to follow these individuals post crimes because they're going to perpetrate again. But again, that would take, infinite number of officers. You simply can't do it from a reality standpoint. I would love to, but there's no easy answer there other than we can't keep up.
Wow. Now, the next case I want to talk about is one that when I read it, I still have a hard time even comprehending this, but the Bad Bunny case. So, first of all, I mean, what kind of person creates a death list in this situation that includes her own son? But again, I don't want to say the details. I want you to take us A to Z through this case. So listeners, just wait till you hear about this Bad Bunny case. Still can't believe she was a former Playmate.
That was kind of the cool part, but I'll walk you through
Right.
the Bad Bunny case for a negotiator, and I'll just be frank, is typically a very easy case, meaning when as a team leader of our negotiator team, we would call out 5 negotiators on a big call. If you had hostages, things like that. On the Bad Bunny case, we just took 2 of us out there because this was a female that was in her home. She had called hospitals, some other agencies, and said she's going to come and kill some doctors and other people with a gun, uh, which then is important for police to become involved. But she was still at home. So these agencies, these hospitals had called us and said, hey, this lady's threatening to kill us. So our SWAT team surrounded her house appropriately, and they called myself and another negotiator out. We have a primary negotiator, which in this case was myself, that talks to the individual one-on-one. We have a secondary negotiator, that was my partner. That person will listen to the call and then write me notes or type on a computer, hey, Doug, you're missing this. She said this, talk more about this, because 4 sets of ears are always better than 2. So in this case, we had primary and secondary. On bigger calls, we have a third negotiator, and that's an intel negotiator. They find out everything about Cheyenne. I don't care. I want to know if Cheyenne drinks Coke or Pepsi. I want to know if Cheyenne ever served in the military. I want to know every job Cheyenne's ever had. I want to know her family, her partner, her kids, everything about Cheyenne I want to know during this investigation. So that third negotiator will go and just dig into the intel on Cheyenne, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, criminal records. We have a lot of sources we can use. That elevates my ability to negotiate with you and maybe hit some, we call it, there's hooks and triggers. A hook is something Cheyenne likes. Cheyenne, do you like animals? Do you have any dogs or cats?
I do. I love my animals. They're like my fur babies. 2 cats, 1 dog. So see, you're already learning stuff here, Doug. You're gaining my
Yeah.
trust right here.
So I'm going to find out that Cheyenne has 2 cats and 1 dog, and I'm going to focus on cats and dogs. I have a dog named Malbec. We're going to talk about my dog. We're going to talk about her dog. My youngest daughter has 2 cats. We're going to talk about those cats before we talk about anybody getting murdered. And then I'm going to gain Cheyenne's trust. So that's a hook. There's triggers. Cheyenne has triggers in her life. I don't know what they are. Could be an ex, could be a family member, could be somebody that stole from her, could be an old boss that fired her. I'm going to avoid triggers. I'm going to stay away from things that piss Cheyenne off because it's not does no good for our conversation. So in this case, with the Bad Bunny, I wanted to get rapport and talk to her about just everyday life, who she was, where she came from. So I called her to the house. She answered the phone. Usually we have to call multiple times, but she answered right away. And I just told her, I said, hey, this is Doug from the Anchorage Police Department. I heard you had made some calls. I want to talk to you about it. She said, okay, no problem. Uh, so we went through her history. I said where she's from. She's from California. I told her I'd been there many times, visited wine country, beautiful. She told me a lot about it. We talked about her family, how long she'd been in Alaska, what she liked about Alaska. So after all that, 30 to 45 minutes, I got into, why did you call the hospital and say you're going to kill some doctors? She said that there's some plastic surgeons that performed surgeries on her that didn't do a great job. There were some attorneys that handled those lawsuits that gave up on her case and said we couldn't, recover anything. There were some accountants that messed up her taxes. She was mad at them all and she wanted them dead. So I walked through why would you want them dead over something like that? And so she kind of explained it through. She obviously had some mental illness. And then she told me she had a death board in her house. Well, I hadn't really heard much about a death board. So I said, well, who's on the death board? Because I want to know as a negotiator. So she literally started reading these names off the death board. And I had to stop her because there were so many names on the death board to try and refocus her on coming out, surrendering. And she said, well, there's just one more name. And I thought, okay, let her give the name. I'm figuring it's an ex-husband or something like that. And she said, it's my 15-year-old son, which kind of, even as a negotiator, threw me back a little bit because why would you want to kill your son? Uh, I had worked a homicide where the mother systematically killed all 3 of her sons. This is more common than people think. It's to send them to a better place, meaning heaven is better than earth because we have so much hate and discontent in her mind on earth that sending them to heaven's better. So they're not doing it to actively harm or hurt their children. In their sick, twisted mind, they're actually helping them. So I remember that case from long ago, and I said, you probably don't really want to harm your son to send him to a better place. Maybe we can work through this. I quickly asked other cops, make sure we have this house surrounded. I found out the son was at school. He wasn't due out of school for another 30 minutes. there's no way he's getting back in this house. So he was safe. So I was good with that. Uh, so I talked her through all this on, hey, let's work through this. Let's get you some help. And then, if you still feel like this later on, it's still up to you on what you want to do with your life. But today, let me give you an opportunity to help you. She said, my son's going to be home soon. I'm going to start my killing spree. You can't help me. What I told her is, your son is going to be home soon, but I have a SWAT team surrounding your house. You're not going to kill him. We're not ever going to allow that. We're going to have to get you some help. At that moment, she really didn't know that the police were outside. She never looked out. And remember when I called in, I said, this is Doug from the police department. She thought this was Doug, a courtesy call from downtown headquarters, just to say hello. She had no clue. So once I explained that to her, she's like, oh my God, I didn't know that. I can't kill anybody. I have to come out. And I was like, yep, we got to our place. Everything was good. What I told her is, can't come out with a gun. She had a gun in her hand. In the book, I detail about why I knew she had a gun in her hand, because she was actually racking the chamber, which is a distinct sound for cops. You can hear the bullets being ejected, put in. So I told her, I know you have a gun. And she told me what kind of gun it was. I said, I carry the exact same gun, which I did. So we kind of, had a rapport in gun ownership. She was fascinated with firearms. But I said, hey, let's put that away before you come out, because gun safety is important. She agreed. So she was trying to get into her bedroom safe to put the gun away. The son, the 15-year-old son, had come home from high school, got off the bus, should have been stopped by our SWAT team. My car was parked around the corner. I had an officer mad dash run towards me. My partner got out, talked to him, immediately jumped back in and said, we got a problem. I put it on mute, the call, while she's trying to put her gun away in the safe. The son had actively walked right into the house. SWAT team had missed him. He went right into the door. Now we got maximum pucker factor, right? So I have to scramble really fast because there could be a gunshot at any moment. So our SWAT team's mobilizing to go in. I go back off mute, trying to scramble in my mind how to get through this. She tells me she can't get the safe open. I asked her, do you know how to take your gun apart? She said, yeah, I take it apart all the time to clean it. I said, how about you take it apart, leave it on the bed, and that way it's safe because nobody can get hurt. So as soon as I heard her take that rack apart, which temporarily disarms that firearm, you could put it back. The SWAT team went in immediately. Luckily for us, as all teenage kids do, the kid went in the front door, went downstairs to watch TV, never even said hello to mom, as kids do. She didn't even know he's home. We took her into custody. During that interrogation, with rapport building, like I told about Cheyenne, I want to find out where you worked, what your career is. She had told me that she was a Hollywood celebrity. I actually put it on mute a little bit because I laughed out loud, because typically 99% these are lies. So I said that I told my partner I used to do some modeling on the side. He said he was in a major motion film. We kind of joked back and forth. She's still talking, but she's on mute. So then we recomposed ourselves. I went back off mute and I got into what'd you do in Hollywood? She's like, well, I dated some Hollywood stars. And then, I was good friends with Hugh Hefner. And, I was like, wow, tell me more about that. So then she said she was a Playboy bunny and actually a Playboy playmate. Again, I believe none of this. There's no way in hell that a cop from Anchorage, Alaska is talking to a Playboy playmate in Anchorage. But besides that,
for a crime.
exactly. But besides that, it doesn't matter. I need to get her out of there. So ultimately, our SWAT team went in and arrested her. Typically, negotiators at that point, we save the day, we high five, and we're out of there. We don't go to the house. We don't do any. We do a report, but not an extensive report. Police officers, SWAT team, they all handle that type of stuff. So we drove away. Our SWAT team contacted me and said, hey, you need to come back to the house. You need to check this out. So I said, okay. So we turned around, went to the house. Sure enough, in her bedroom was her centerfold. Above her bed, just framed. There was pictures of her with Hugh Hefner. There was pictures of her with Hollywood stars. Now, keep in mind, these were many, many years prior. But she was nonetheless the real deal. She was an actual Playboy playmate, very few and far between in the history of Playboy. So that was a good learning lesson for me because I discounted it, but it made me a better negotiator because until you can prove something wrong, you got to have trust and you got to believe people. So it was a great lesson for me. She had some other odd fetishes called lust murder. Part of the reason for killing the doctor's attorney's her son was she fantasized sexually on killing people, and then physically she could get herself off later thinking about that. not having sex with the bodies, not like necrophilia, but just the pure thought of murdering people sexually aroused her. And she had many pictures, hand drawn, dictating that, really messed up in her mind. So she was charged with terroristic threatening, which is the act of threatening to commit people.
Mhm.
Ultimately, she served a long sentence in one of our psychiatric institutes appropriately, because mentally she was really compromised and got the help that she needed.
Well, see, there you go, guys. It goes to show that, you want someone drop dead gorgeous and maybe a Playboy playmate, but you better watch because she might have some crazy kink going on. And that was actually what my next question of the, I don't know how to say this, but erotophonophilia, which means sexual arousal from her. How common is this?
That's a rare one. I'll be frank with you. I hadn't sat in my career before. Studies show it's not severely uncommon, but in Alaska, that's the only case I'd ever worked where I'd seen that. Necrophilia, no, that's a different story. That's actual sex with the bodies post-homicide. But hers, I'd never seen. The simpler term, and it's hard to pronounce, like you said, is lust.
Mhm.
Uh, Not overly common. It's a rare paraphilia. Uh,
Mhm.
so it's the only time I've ever seen it.
Yeah, very weird. So here's the next case. Again, I hope you guys can stomach this. This one is the Harold J. Simpson dog park case. So take us through that one, Doug.
Well, this one I particularly don't like, obviously, as an animal lover. I have
Of
my own dog,
course.
Malbec. I've had dogs before. Alaskans love, dogs are a pet of choice. The daughter has a couple of cats, but I think nearly every Alaskan has one or two dogs. We have dog parks in the spring. We go through long winters, 8 months of darkness. So when it becomes springtime or summertime, obviously dog parks, any type of parks, we take our animals out, let them run free, enjoy the sunshine, the green grass, because we have such a short period. Well, Harold Simpson liked to do the same, but he had a quite unusual fetish. His was bestiality, which is sex with animals. So what he did, he went to this dog park, took duct tape with him, took a green leash rope with him, and would actively look at this dog park with, at the time, 10 to 15 different dogs running free, off leash, but in an area. So there was a lady, a citizen that saw him grab kind of like a golden retriever and put a leash around it and then pull it into the woods. Alaska's heavily wooded with trees.
Mhm.
She thought it was odd. And again, this is where I tell people when your gut tells you something's wrong, it probably is. But many people push it aside and just go with the flow and think I must be wrong. But the golden retriever and Harold Simpson went into the woods. And about 20 minutes later, the dog came running out, unleashed. And then Harold Simpson came out as well. She didn't think much of it until he just hung around the dog park and there's a black lab running free. And then he took the same green rope and went and got the lab and then pulled the lab reluctantly into the woods. At this point, she knew that, fool me once, but twice, something's wrong. She got a
Right.
couple of gentlemen at the park that were also walking their dogs. So she wouldn't have to go in the woods and said, hey, this guy has pulled two dogs into the woods. I don't know what the hell's going on, but I need some help. Alaskans pretty tough and gruff where we grew up. So the two guys said, oh, hell yeah, we'll go check it out. They went storming into the woods and they found Harold Simpson actively sodomizing the black lab. He had been duct taped to a tree and he had his snout wrapped up with the leash. So obviously couldn't bite. And he was literally in the act when they discovered him. They called the police, and thus an investigation ensued. What was unique in this case, and sadly, is that when the time it occurred, is we didn't actively have an anti-bestiality law in Alaska. You couldn't
Mhm.
charge Harold Simpson with active bestiality. And while you think this may be rare, there's still a state, Wyoming, that doesn't have an anti-bestiality law. And only recently has Hawaii and New Mexico and others enacted these laws. We're talking in the 2000s, this is in 1950. This is today. Fascinates me. Who would actively push back against an anti-bestiality law? But they do. Uh, so nonetheless, he was arrested, charged with what we call criminal mischief. And all that statute says is you're taking the property of another temporarily without permission. Uh, a
Okay.
really low misdemeanor crime. Because we since have enacted bestiality laws because of Harold Simpson. But that's a unique individual with that mindset. He not only go to the dog park prepared, he planned this out with rope and duct tape. And then with 15 dogs in the dog park, think about this. He actively profiled his victims, which were dogs, and selected the victims he was most interested in. I mean, it's just pure insanity. These individuals we can't let out. Harold Simpson's, he's a threat to society because he's going to
100%.
actively target and be a perp on any humans, dogs, anything. So that was a real awakening in my career where the trust factor on people, right? It lowers because you always wonder what they're going to do. But a unique case, we since have a bestiality law, thank God. But every state in the union has active bestiality cases, charges, there's victim animals. And worldwide too. It's not just Alaska or the US.
For you, Doug, though, how do you even begin to process a person like this? I mean, I know you just said that, like, wow, this was like kind of a new one for me, but I mean, and granted, you're very professional, so you do your job, but when you're like driving on the way home, like what goes through your mind, how you just keep getting surprised at these different types of crimes just arising. And I mean, now the fact that you said there are states that, want to fight back on something like this. I mean, a human should be protected, but so should our animals from anything. I mean, and even if you think it's not something that's common, protect them anyway. So that way it doesn't become common. But how do you wrap your mind around that?
I don't think you ever fully wrap your mind around it. It's just impossible. I mean, you want to lock them all up, put them in prison, and throw away the key to protect society, animals, everybody. You want to follow them 24 hours a day because they're going to reoffend. That's not possible because there's so many perpetrators out there. So I think the next best thing is protecting the public, right? Make sure that others know how to be safe, how to stay away from those situations. I don't blame the citizen the first time she saw him take a golden retriever.
Right.
But again, follow your gut feeling. If something's wrong, tell the police, call. The police department is free for you. We're there to do a job. Even if it's not the case, let's say that he was just the pet owner, there's no harm, no foul. We come, we check it out, we investigate it, and we let him go. Uh, but there's a good likelihood that he is an offender, and we make the arrest and we stop it at that point. So citizens out there that see something that feels wrong, please let us know. There's no bad information. You're not going to hurt our feelings by giving something that didn't materialize into a crime. We just want the information. And most people, when they give it, we find something out that's, offensive or a criminal act. So it's important for everybody. That gut feeling, I always go back to it. I teach my kids this. If it feels wrong, report it. Or if you're going to be a victim, it feels wrong, keep yourself safe in a public area. But always follow that gut feeling.
Now, one more question on his case. Did he have any other crime on his record of anything at all? Like anything, peeping Tom, robbery, anything? Because I just want to kind of know, again, when I started at the beginning of the show saying, we're going through these also to create awareness. This is for educational purposes too. So the fact that you should be a little bit more interviewish with, your dog walker, if you want to find a dog walker, but did this guy have any other type of crimes that he was committing?
Great question. He absolutely did. That's the first place I went. So he was actually a child predator. So he had sexually assaulted children in the past. Now, this is a far stretch where you go from children to dogs. But in his mind, dogs would be less. He was caught on the child sexual predators. So dogs can't speak, right? So he would get away with this. So again, these are predators that will find a way. They're smart enough to think around the law. So preferred children as his victims. He was a pedophile, realized he got caught on that, sentenced, albeit a light sentence, unfortunately. So he then went to animals to perpetrate. Keep in mind, these are two dogs he grabbed in the dog park and sexually assaulted. Could have been hundreds or thousands before we caught him. This wasn't his first go at it. But he had morphed onto animals to victimize because he was caught on humans. That's how deviant these minds can be.
Unreal. Unreal.
So we're talking about laws, right? And Farah and I are sitting here like, what do you mean? There's no bestiality laws in all of the states. I mean, it's crazy to me. But now let's take that one step further and let's talk about the really disturbing rise of the bodily fluid attacks. How is throwing semen on a woman not classified as a sex crime across all 50 states? I mean, how do we wrap our brains around that and understand that?
Yeah, it blows me away too. I mean, go back to the pizza story. He ejaculated on a pizza, had a female victim eat it, and that was a power trip to him, but yet he couldn't be charged at the time. I mean, it's just disgusting. Semen flinging is like a trend throughout the lower 48. It's wild. So I'm going to go back to power. And in my book, I dictate that we open up in the book. I said, sex is about power. It just is. Biological as we all think it is, it's really power. For these individuals, for them to throw semen on you and then to actively go away and think about that act and masturbate, that's power for them. It excites them. It's not about the physical act of throwing the actual semen on you. That's mentally they're empowered. They got one over on you as a victim and they gratify themselves later. So whether it's semen flinging, bestiality, necrophilia, they're all power. And I will tell you, sexually deviant crimes are kind of like drugs. They're always going to amp it up. There's going to be a new flavor. There's going to be a new sexual deviancy that comes about where they victimize. There always will be. So in my career, as I got farther and farther in my career, nothing really surprised me because I knew there'd be something new. The semen flinging, as a male who, is happily married and is normal, would do nothing for me, right? I'd want to make love to my wife or something like that. That would be normal. In their minds, that's better than actual sex because they're victimizing. They know that there's trauma on that individual. And so they relive that trauma in their mind where they gratify themselves. And that's the best. It would be just like us thinking normal sex. But for them, that's normal. So it's interesting how states fight this, state legislatures. I don't know. It's a great question. And typically, unfortunately, law enforcement is behind the power curve because until these things happen, these strange sexual deviant things, they don't enact laws until they happen or become a problem. So we're always behind the power curve, meaning that there's victims that have to be victims for no reason. Because we should automatically, if you throw a substance, whether it's blood, semen, fecal, anything, on somebody else, you should be charged. Should be a no-brainer.
And I
I
just
mean,
want to
absolutely.
interject before you go on to the next question, just for our listeners. We had finished the dog park case. The questions that we're going into now are taking from some other crimes that Doug had investigated or been a part of. So, yes, there was a man that was flinging semen on women in grocery stores and shit. So these next questions just didn't want to get you guys lost. Like, is this the dog park or the pizza guys? So yeah, I just wanted to make that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Cheyenne. I just want to make sure our listeners were following up.
No, no, that's fine. I want to make sure everybody's up to speed on where we are because we're sitting here, looking at it and doing this live. So not classifying these as sex crimes across all 50 states. But you said something interesting though, and I kind of just want to touch on that really quickly. Our justice system, right? And it feels like they're it's really set up for almost the bad guy to win as opposed to the victim or the good guy to win. So when you talk about that the justice system or law enforcement is behind the eight ball on all of these upping the ante and these new sexual assaults that are coming out, is this an issue with the justice system where the victims are just being left traumatized or being re-traumatized over and over again?
Let me just add on to her question because you had mentioned that guy had he was molesting or sexually abusing children and he was let off from that. Why? Like why?
Yeah, I think, and we talked about it earlier, and these are great questions by you both, especially from law enforcement. You fit right in with us. We think about this constantly as to how to fix it. We're a different level than our judicial system, and there's checks and balances, and I agree with all that. I will say, from a criminal justice system, the United States is one of the best ever. The preponderance of the evidence is on the prosecuting agency, on law enforcement. It should be that way, meaning if I can't prove my case 100%, you should go free. Where I think we run into problems is where I prove my case and the prosecutor proves it, and you're convicted on sexual deviant crimes and these light touches. And what I mean with that is some of these semen flinging cases, they got 3 months of probation, meaning you didn't even have to pick up trash, right? I don't know what 3 months probation does. So the severity of the punishment must correlate. That's where it doesn't jive with law enforcement, right?
No.
If you shoplift, I get it. You might get probation on your first one. I'm okay with that. Sexual deviants, they're powered, their brain is powered by this. They have to be, I mean, you have to have serious punishment up front to have any hope of stopping this. So in my experience, I think that the lack of severity in these cases helps these individuals later, because if you got 6 months, even in jail, 6 months for a pretty bad crime, what's to stop you really from doing it again? 6 months was nothing to you. And you're probably let out in 2 months because you're not going to serve the whole 6 months. You're going to serve a very short part of it. So what I find in these is the punishment needs to fit the crime and take the circumstances into play. So you have the dog molester that molested 2 dogs in the park, former child predator. He needs some severe punishment. You can't
Right.
give a slap on the wrist. He's going to go out and offend again. And this time it could be a sexual assault on a human. It could be a homicide. It could be something else. This happens all the time. I do love our criminal justice system, but I'll tell you, I never know what juries are going to do. Sometimes they acquit, sometimes they don't. But I think the punishment's got to fit the crime. I think that's where we get it wrong sometimes.
Yeah, and I just to go off your answer there, I just wish that we need to start doing to scare criminals the first time a little more, because the reoffense percentages are very high. If you look at the new El Salvador maximum prison that was built, these men who are all tattooed up MS-13 gang members, some Tren de Aguaguras thrown in there members, they're in one cell and there's like 40 of them. I mean, there's like 3 beds, have at it. Oh, well. And they do really hard religion in there. Like they're like 23 hours a day. They're sitting, reading scripture, hearing scriptures. I guess my thing is, I wish that we could up the ante a little bit more for first time offenders, second time offenders, because granted, I'm with you. I do love the justice system. I respect it. But, Doug, I don't know if you've been, hearing a lot within the lower 48 that's been going on the last 4 years. We've seen a lot of, murderers be able to be bailed out and walk on the streets. In one case, I can remember a murderer was let out and he killed the 2 witnesses that were going to be on his trial, because the whole Democratic deep state has been so seeping in the veins of the country. I mean, granted, with our show, it's not a D or R show. It is an independent, and we say the truth, and that is the truth, is that criminals are being let out when they shouldn't be with bond. If somebody robs, we're hearing, they hold up a 7-Eleven, they're getting bailed out, they're making bond, and then you don't hear anything again. They're not in jail. And it's just, I wish we need we need to start scaring people more, because whenever you tell somebody who has a rap sheet, 50 pages long, and why do they just keep letting people go back out? We can respect the justice system, but as a whole, what is it behind that drives these people to be allowed out when it's like, look, we've smacked you 5 times. You don't get it. Okay, look, this is robbery number 1, robbery number 2, number 3. You started going into home invasions and tying people up. You have an aggravated murder. And, it's just, I don't get that. I don't get why we can't. Look, you rape a child, you go to prison for 5 fucking years. And then if you go out and you reoffend, we're going to cut your fucking dick off. And that's it. That's it. Because maybe if you do it for some, then it'll make others not think about it. Same with murder. You kill someone, if there's DNA, solid DNA evidence, if there's fingerprints, and it is a slam dunk case. No. They don't get death penalty and get to sit on death row for 15 years and lift weights, watch TV, and be friends with Bobby. They need to be put in the gas chamber the next day, and that's it. because then you can stop crime from happening, because then you don't have these 17-year-olds want to be thug that's like, well, let me total it here. If I kill this time, as long as I kind of clean up a little bit and it's not slam dunk, I'll get 20 years. I'll be out in like 10, 15, and then I'll be out and be able to go to it again. And I mean, you have the moments thinking that.
Well, I think first of all, I need to put Farah and Cheyenne on all my prior juries because I would love to have you on my juries, and we get a lot of convictions then, I think, because you guys know you think very practically. What the short answer is yes, the first punishment, and I relate this to people who have kids, right? If you give your kid 10 one last chances, probably not effective. If they actually get punishment, maybe they have to mow the lawn, clean up the yard, like that, they remember that and they kind of change their attitude, right?
Right.
Criminals are not that far off from it on the low level type crimes. What we have to remember is there's 10% of criminals that commit 90% of crimes. What we lack as a nation is we're afraid to lock that 10% up permanently because everybody deserves a chance. Everybody can be rehabilitated. Everybody has can go out in society and be productive. That's not the truth. I've worked 25 years. There's some individuals, as sad as it is to say, that cannot walk the planet Earth with us. They need to be incarcerated. I'm happy that many people have never seen evil. I've seen evil over and over again. They must be put in a cell and locked forever. And I wouldn't blink an eye on doing it. I'd do it myself if I could. The general public doesn't know that. They don't see evil. I hope they never do. But it's out there and it preys upon victims. So let's lock those real serious offenders up. Let's lock them up permanently when appropriate if they commit heinous crimes. And then these low-level criminals, let's make them pay a little bit. Let's let them feel the pain, and then they make the choice. It won't save all of them, but it'll certainly save more than we're saving now.
Right.
And I know, Fair, I know we talked about this last night on here, but because I have Doug here right now, I just want to kind of get your viewpoint on this. And I think all three of us seem to be on the same page. So up here in my state of Connecticut, they are releasing a man who murdered and ate somebody, ate his brain, his eyes, other parts. They're releasing him from jail. They're saying that he's schizophrenic and his schizophrenia has been cured. It's been cured because he's heavily medicated. They're releasing him back out into the county that I live into. He's been in there since 2011, and now he's being released. So when we talk about these heinous criminals, like this guy is one of them. Yes, he's mentally ill. I mean, absolutely, completely mentally ill, diagnosed with schizophrenia. He should never see the light of day again, in my opinion. I live here. I have children here. And this is where I feel that there is a very big disconnect between our legal system and accountability and consequences for behaviors, and them saying, like, oh no, this guy's so overly medicated, like he's not going to do it again. So we'll release him so we can put somebody else in his place. But the minute he's out, he's not going to have the supports of somebody saying, take your pill, let me see, did you swallow it? Now let me monitor you and make sure that you are stable and put you back in your cell. So where's the line here that regular citizens kind of can walk? I know that if you see something, say something, right? But coming from law enforcement, from you, what are some other recourses that we have here?
Yeah, on your assembly, your state representatives elect different individuals if they do that. That in your case, and I don't know the case you're talking about, but taking it for face value, if you ate another human being, as a hostage negotiator, profiler, investigator, that person likely not ever going to be rehabilitated. He needs to be incarcerated in some form or fashion in perpetuity to protect the nation. I see that a lot. Alaska is no different. We have homicides where perpetrators maybe get 2 to 5 years. Absolute insanity. You've taken a victim's life. They'll never live again. Their families will suffer in the rest of their lives, their kids, wives, whoever it is, and you're going to be out in 3 to 5 years. Unacceptable. We have to change. We have to vote different people in to enact those laws and punishments. That's the only way. But again, in that instance, this is incumbent upon all of us. Protect yourself. In the meantime, with those individuals out there raining terror down upon society, protect yourself. Lock your houses, keep yourself safe, have cameras around, things like that to protect yourself. It's sad we have to do that, but law enforcement can't be there all the time. So you have to rely on your own safety.
Man, I tell you, it's like it's like a martial law almost in some instances, right? So if you have something to protect yourself, you should. So that leads me into this next question. Where do we draw the line before, harmless freaks escalate to full-on sexual assault?
I think you draw the line by when they commit a crime, anybody, they have punishment for their crime and they have avenues towards rehabilitation. If those don't work, they continue with their sentence and stay imprisoned. If you get extreme, you just have to imprison those. Like I said, those 10% that wreak havoc on society, they just have to stay in jail, psychiatric institutes, somewhere where they can't harm society because they will offend again. It's proven, right? It's proven a lot of these murderers that get out murder again. A lot of these cases, whether they're acquitted or they just get off after a light sentence, they commit heinous crimes again. So enough's enough, right? What I find is a lot of our state legislatures and city assemblies, once their family members or they become victims, they have a 180. But before then, they haven't really seen evil or these crimes committed. So they're oblivious to what actually happens in the community. And that's not a bad thing because you're living a pretty chill life, stress-free. But once somebody in their family's offended, they do a 180 and they want the maximum punishment. So we have to have a happy medium there. People have to be realistic. If you're a criminal and you're going to harm society, you just can't be in society. Seems simple to me, but it's difficult for others.
Okay, now we're getting towards the end of the show, and this has been on my mind since I was on like page 25 on your book. And I forgot to put it on the list, and I remembered what it was. Okay, my thing is the kink. Okay, so we all know husband and wives, boyfriend and girlfriends, or the Tinder people, things like that for the one night meetups. We all know people have fantasies and certain kinks. Okay, so being that this is for educational purposes, what's that line? Where's that red flag, Doug? Now, since you've been doing this for so long, let's take a Tinder because that's more of a you don't know this person. Okay. When someone wants to do choking, okay, it could be into a role play, yada, yada. Some of the pictures that I was going through, of course, the last climax, the one where the professor had, they do the thing where they suffocate themselves as they come for like a better, you know. So taking relationships, Doug, out there, and everybody's starting to get into more of these fantasies and fetishes. What are some red flags, and what should you not deal with, and how do you go as a guy or a girl, because it can happen. There could be a psycho woman, as we know, the Bad Bunny. I
Yep.
guess there's like 10 questions in one, and I'm sorry for that. There's just, there's so much more sexual deviant crimes than there is. And it's because people start out with one thing, but then they want to go. That's where I'm scared, because, I'll be honest, once or twice, there is a choking, my husband and I would do, I'd say grab my throat a little bit harder or something like that. But I mean, you don't do it every day, all day, and think that, now I want you to tie me up on the rafter and choke me with your tie. It's different. But I'm worried that people, if they start something, that can create something, since there is so mental illness running rampant. I don't know. I'm sorry. There's like 15 questions in there, Doug.
Yeah, you bring up a
So,
lot of good points. I'll start it off with there's fetishes and paraphilias. So what I'll say with fetishes, there's not a human on the planet Earth that doesn't have a fetish of some sort sexually, right? That's just your preference that whether it's breath play, like you said, getting choked by your husband or your wife, whatever you like, uh, can be somewhat normal, right? In those aspects, whether you like whipped cream, strawberries, spraying on the bodies, whatever you want. Fetishes are typically normal, meaning that's just your preference in sex. Go to Pornhub, whatever porn you download, that's your fetish. And there's many
mhm.
categories. So think of that as a fetish. A paraphilia is when you go beyond the fetish where you're going to harm yourself or another individual. Those become dangerous. So if you're on Tinder and the guy likes breath play or you like breath play, perfectly fine. If the guy likes to pour acid on you while he's having sex and burn you physically, which happens, that's a paraphilia. That's getting dangerous. That's a red flag, right? So fetishes are okay. There's nothing wrong with it. Everybody has them. Paraphilias, which is like a super fetish that harms you or others, that's where you get outrageous. And people can start off with fetishes and go to paraphilias. Most
Right.
normal humans, hardwired correctly, use their fetishes with their spouse, lovers, partners. Nothing ever happens. They both enjoy whatever they're into, and that's that. Where law enforcement comes in is where you harm yourself or somebody else is a paraphilia, or it gets extreme. So each individual is unique, but that's, kind of like a guide on Tinder. If somebody's into something that physically causes severe pain to you, not temporary and repeated, probably a red flag and you stay away from it. Or if they're amping up to that, they may start you off slowly to groom you into it. You got to be very careful, but normal fetishes are probably entirely okay.
Just like so worried about young girls, especially, Cheyenne and I always talk about OnlyFans and how, our young generation, they want that instant gratification with money. They want to make $1 million. They want to show off on Instagram and show their car and their bags and their sunglasses and all that. But you start playing with danger. And I'm just, so scared that, since again, mental health is it's just bad here, in the lower 48. I'm not sure what the statistics are in Alaska so much as I am here. But why do you think people are so fascinated with deviant crimes? Do you think it's like a morbid curiosity, or do you think there's something deeper?
It's kind of like criminality. You want to, if you're into that, you want to push the envelope. So whereas one kink might be fine, you want to go to the next level, the next level, the next level. That's where you get into trouble. But again, those people probably inherently are already a little more deviant than mainstream, because most of us would have kinks that we are normal in our aspect and we do them. We wouldn't constantly try to look for the next level, the next high, the next sexual conquest. That's probably not in our DNA, but some have it. And again, it gets extreme and then people die and becomes a problem. And that's why I've seen so much in my career, is because ultimately a lot of these resulted in death. Autoerotic asphyxiation resulted in death, homicide sexually perpetrated, serial killers who had postmortem sex with corpses. That's where law enforcement comes in, always at typically either as a victim or when they are killed. So we have a lot of experience. We see a lot of it. The little things don't shock us that much. It's these big things that people progress, but it's similar to crimes. They progress slowly but surely, and then they get into where it's unsafe.
Take us through the most deviant of the necrophilia cases that you've been through.
I think they're all bad, and I know we've talked about this
Of
with your
course,
viewers.
that's
Uh,
obvious.
yeah, but there's three categories of necrophilia, as
Mhm.
odd as it sounds. There's fantasy necrophilia, and I'll explain that to your viewers. Like, I worked a case in Anchorage, typically prostitutes in Anchorage. I would go as a street cop and I would talk to, get to know, build a rapport. The reason for that is that working girls know more about Anchorage and the criminality that happens than anybody else, cops included. So they would always get good information, who the robbers were, the drug dealers. They would freely give me that information. I would obviously leave them alone in their profession. So we had a real good rapport. I talked to them every weekend, make sure they're safe, things like that. One of them told me that, asked me if I had a wife, and I was like, yeah, I got a wife. And uh, she said, well, I hope she likes you. And I was like, well, I hope she likes me. Pretty nice guy. So she explained to me there was this John that had a rather unusual fetish, and it was fantasy necrophilia. So he would pay her to play dead and then have sex with her body. And then when she breathed too much or she moved, he would get upset and scream at her and
Why?
and then pay her for this sex. Ultimately, he brought her to his house. His wife was on vacation. The wife didn't like this type of fetish and wouldn't do it and called him crazy. So his revenge on the wife when she was with family out of state was to have sex with the prostitute in her own bed. Ultimately, this prostitute left him, but that's fantasy necrophilia. He never acted, or we don't know if he acted, actual
Mm.
next category, normal necrophilia. I know that sounds
Can't
odd.
believe it's called normal.
Yeah, to put it normal, but I'll explain. These are perpetrators that look for morgues, mortuary, funeral homes. The victims are already deceased and they engage in sexual intercourse with the deceased. They don't actively go out. They don't hire prostitutes. They just take advantage of the dead individuals right there and have sex with them. I wouldn't call it normal either. That's off the charts weird, but that's a category. The last one is homicidal necrophilia. That's the worst. Those individuals, such as serial killers, actively look to kill an individual, not because they don't like them, not because they harmed them in any way, but for the sole reason of having sex with them post-mortem after killing them, for that ultimate power. I killed you, I took your life, now I'm having sex with your dead body. There's no greater power in the world. Those are the worst I've ever seen. Joshua Wade and Israel Keys both practiced that, homicide and necrophilia, where they engaged in sex with the corpses post-mortem. Very hard for them to admit that because they'll be killed in prison. So they allude to it. They never fully say, yeah, I went out and had sex with her afterwards. They'll just give you little nuggets because even for a serial killer, that's above and beyond. They don't want to admit to it. But that's exactly what they did. So
Wow.
homicidal necrophilia is by far the worst.
And wasn't the one he had killed her, put her in the shed for like 2 weeks and then went on vacation or something, came back, thought her out, and then had sex with her? Was that Israel?
That's Israel. And keep in mind, in Alaska in February, even in Anchorage, could typically be 10, 15, 20 below. A body would be frozen solid, not unlike an ice cube out of the freezer. That's how solid you'd be frozen. So for that mind to think through it, to then thaw somebody out, I mean, just you're off the charts. Those are the individuals I've told your audience we can't ever let walk on the face of the earth again. They must be incarcerated forever. You just can't let them out. So when people say, no, I think they can be rehabilitated, it fascinates me because I don't think they can.
Now, real quick, with the fact that you I don't know if Israel had did he have a girlfriend?
He had a girlfriend and
I
the
thought,
daughter.
okay. How do if my husband is like 5 minutes late, I'm worried. I'm not meaning in the suffocating way. I'm like, oh my God, did he get in a car accident or whatever? How do these, because I mean, I know how the victims' families think. We all know how the victims' family think. Do you get to talk to the families and the close friends or girlfriend boyfriends of these like, I don't know if there was any girls that did necrophilia or anything, but that you had investigated, but what do they say? I mean, do they not, are there no red flags that they are doing something, that there's a body stored in the shed just 6 feet away? Like, that's what I don't get, is how they can be so not, like, I don't know. It's just weird. Like, where's the
Yeah.
red flags, if anything?
Most don't know in my experience, which is odd to say. Take Israel Keys for an example, a contractor, construction, building. He's got a great profession to say, I got to go out
Right.
early. I got to go out late. I got to check the plumbing. Something happened on the job site at 2 o'clock in the morning. I got to go out. So he really, he had a good career to back up being gone for long periods of time. And he did it. He did a business, right? He was a contractor. So he actually had that. Most times they don't know. And when they do know, they may have suspected, but they had no factual evidence, right? We interview and the reason why we interview everybody, family, is because ultimately they're witnesses, right?
Right.
Somebody knows something, mothers, brothers, sisters, girlfriends, partners, somebody knows something. We interview them all. The vast majority, whether they wanted to know or not, or were oblivious or didn't pay attention, they weren't partners to the crime, meaning they didn't know somebody was being killed and they kept it from police. They may have thought their loved one was strange. They may have thought he was having an affair. They didn't quite know, but they didn't know to the extent of what they were doing. So it's very rare that the family's involved at all or had real knowledge of it, in my experience.
Now, does media attention help or hurt when it comes to catching these sort of criminals?
Media attention, if they're not caught, I don't know that it helps or hurts at all. Media attention post incarceration can help to identify additional victims because then we play on the ego, meaning you're on the local news, you're in the newspaper. I would feed this individual those articles talking about their crimes because it excites them, right? And the more homicides we solve, the more media, the more newspaper articles, the more podcasts that they're on. So they get fulfilled that way. During the investigation, sometimes it's harmful, sometimes it's helpful. What I don't like is when the media comes out with a suspect, maybe gives information they've gathered from law enforcement as to the suspect's whereabouts or what they look like. because then they go into hiding. And if we don't really know who they are, it makes our job a lot more difficult. That happens sometimes. So I prefer no media till post arrest, where you works better.
Gotcha.
So let's kind of talk about something that Farah and I really love to talk about, which is Hollywood. Um, how do you feel that Hollywood is making it almost worse by really romanticizing or fantasticizing uh serial killers? I mean, Netflix Monster, their series has come out with Dahmer, the Menendez boys, and now Ed Gein. And if you look at the people who are playing them, I mean, Ed Gein, the actor that they have playing him, is not what Ed Gein looked like. So do you think that that plays any part into putting this really overly negative attention on making it look like it's very glamorous, or that you do get attention from the media or from podcasts or from interviewers?
Yeah, both negatives and positives from those. The negative would be those individuals out there that are, you know, that want to kill or want to harm people. They may be excited by this, and they may be able to set their history in play and eventually get a show like that if they killed enough people. So I think if you're on the cusp there, that could help you go out and perpetrate on victims to be similar to that and to be remembered by that by the public, to get a Netflix show, a Hulu show, whatever it is. So I think there's some of that, right? Kind of that copycat syndrome. We see it all the time in law enforcement. It's going to excite them. They're going to see what they could be. They're going to go out on a high note, whether they take their own lives or they get caught. And then they're going to maybe have this documentary series where 50 million people are going to watch it. And that's the only way they're ever going to be known, because perhaps they're not successful in their own life. They have a bad relationship, whatever it is. That's the bad side. I see that. The good side is when individuals like you watch it, my daughters watch it, other individuals watch it. I hope it turns the light bulb on, that we understand that we have to self-protect, meaning lock your doors at night, don't go into dark areas, fight. If somebody's going to abduct you, you have to fight. What I found in my investigations, typically under 2 hours, the individual is dead almost every single time. So if they're going to kill you on site where they're going to abduct you, they're certainly going to kill you later. Most times when victims fight, they're released, and those perpetrators go on to find a victim that doesn't, fight against them. So I tell my daughters, fight, scream, yell. If you're going to be killed there, you're certainly going to be killed in a much worse scenario later. So you have to fight. So I think that's a positive, that when the public sees this, they'll see evil, they'll understand it exists. And, I keep mentioning the 40, 50 serial killers that are actively out there in the United States. I don't know what states they are. They could be next door to us right now, right? We could have saw them in the grocery store earlier today. You got to keep yourself safe. It's hard for them to just snatch you up if you don't put yourself in a area where you're, subject to be a victim. So I tell my daughters, if you walk out into a garage at night at 2 a.m. to get your car and it's desolate, probably, and it feels wrong, don't go there. Call somebody, go to a public place. Don't put yourself in those positions. The victims that I've seen typically go with the perpetrator, and I get it, fear. I'm not judging them. Scared to death that they're going to be killed. The problem is you're going to be killed regardless. Not many survive being abducted. And in reality, it's going to be very hard for the police to find you in 2 hours. I'm just going to be frank with you. From start to finish, unless we have a license plate, something like that, we're not going to be able to solve the case with a video, with officers in under 2 hours. Very rare. So you got to protect yourself.
Oh my gosh. So as we go into our outro, I do want to make sure that we say prayers to every single one of the victims of the crimes that we had discussed, whether they were, some, as we know, victims were just people that ate a bad pizza or may have gotten, semen flung on them. They're still a victim in some way, because that can be very traumatizing to someone. Of course, the people that lost their lives, our hearts go out to their families. Again, this show tonight wasn't to glorify anything, but it was more of to, now in a day and age of mental illness, like I said, we don't know what our neighbors are doing behind their closed doors, as they don't know what we're doing behind ours. Women out there, always keep an eye, a watch out of yourself when you go to Walmart or Target or a grocery store. look behind you, make sure that you have a remote beeper for your car. So if if something happens, you can beep and make a noise. Always, when you're shopping for clothes in the mall, be aware of your surroundings. I can't tell you how many times if I go shopping, if I'm looking at a sweater and I take it off the rack, I'm like going to the left, to the right. I'm kind of looking, in front. And there was a video just the other day where there were two young girls that had their cell phone camera sat in front of them as they were playing like a driving game at an arcade. And you can see the back had like a window, and there was two men looking at them. And one of the men had come in and was going to grab, but had seen that she was recording on her phone, and then just acted like he was going to get in to the video arcade game. I mean, a 50-year-old man, whatever. And then there was a man that came, must have been his partner, that almost looked like he was wearing a Michael Myers mask, but that was his normal face. He was that scary looking. So, but of course, men as well, you all have to be careful out there. Don't just think that a woman's drop dead gorgeous, that she might not be psycho. Okay. We have a lot of good looking, look at Jodi Arias. She was a very pretty girl, and, stabbed her boyfriend, her ex-boyfriend, or whatever he was going to be called at the time, stabbed him how many times and left him for dead in the shower. So you have to be careful and always be aware. But besides the murder and the rape, look at these other crimes. And this is just, to make sure everyone out there is staying safe, staying protective. If you're someone that uses Tinder or Grindr, especially, come on. How do you think Jeffrey Dahmer got some of his, he went to a bar. It might have not have been Tinder, but at the time that was his Tinder. It's the same thing. You meet somebody, you've never seen him before, come back for a drink. Or John Wayne Gacy, want to play with handcuffs? And what would he do? These young boys would put their hands behind their back and he would say, I can get you out of the handcuffs without a key or something like that. They'd be handcuffed and boom, they're done. It can just be that 1 second of play that your whole life can change, and maybe even lose your life. But Doug, what's next for you?
Probably write a few more books on true
I'm
crime.
hoping.
Yeah, and some will be more traditional. So I'll dictate some of the serial killer cases that I work that are real interesting, and some of the audio that I have post conviction with some of these serial killers. So that'll be, fun for readers. But the first book, it's done lights out. It's available on Amazon, anywhere you get books, Barnes and Nobles. But an interesting read. And again, we focus on this. To your listeners, pepper spray is pretty cheap. There's key fobs that have, ear piercing alarms. Any of those you can just carry with you. It's a good tool. And again, suspects are normally going to run away. They don't like attention. So cheap things to have to keep you safe. I buy them for my own kids. Hopefully they don't have to use them, but it's a good tool to have to keep yourself safe.
And listeners, we hope that you enjoyed this episode of Social Disruption. We walked through crime scenes. We've looked into the mind of killers and pulled back the curtain on a world most people pretend doesn't exist. If you made it through this episode, you know just how dark humanity can get. These criminals aren't myths. They're just, they aren't just stories. They're real. If you could take one thing away from this conversation, let it be this: stay aware, trust your instincts, know the warning signs. For more on Doug Fifer, grab his book, 50 Shades of True Crime, Sex, Drugs, and Killer Kink. I love this book. Highly recommend it. Of course, you know that when this episode will be up on YouTube, but of course, we will have it out on all social platforms, probably in a day or two after I edit, but we always put in the show notes, their links to the books as well, information on Doug, and check out dougfifer.com for more on this lovely gentleman.
And if you missed this episode live, don't worry. You can catch the full replay, like Farah said, in the upcoming days. Follow us for more unfiltered truth at Social Disruption Pod on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, and TikTok, at Raw Disruptor on X, and at Raw_Disruptor on Rumble and Truth Social.
And again, thank you to all our wonderful listeners for showing up in the chat tonight. You have my love greatly. This was Social Disruption. Sleep well if you can. And until next time, stay bold.
Stay unapologetic.
Stay disruptive.
Ooh.
Mm-mm-mm.